the wokeness of the situation, I would say, the idea that you have to discriminate someone against people in order to please others.
It's my understanding the EEOC has declined to enforce Title VII against other companies with actual and literally explicit restrictions in their employment practices that are based on race. So is the EEOC suing companies over seemingly neutral policies like requiring criminal background checks and appropriate use of enforcement resources in light of more explicit policies based on race at U.S. companies that you have observed in your work?
That's 100% correct.
That was Jim Comer of Kentucky questioning witnesses about the EEOC. I wanted to highlight this part of the hearing because it showcases the double standard when it comes to so-called discrimination. One of the things that was sold when it comes to the expansion of the federal government was that it was supposedly going to make things more fair and equal. By default, if you base that so-called equality on race and gender, then you're going to have to discriminate against other people based on their race and gender. So essentially, we created a portion of the government that exists to help discriminate against certain people because other people were discriminated against in the past. And if that makes sense to you, then you should probably apply for a job at the EEOC because you'll fit right in.
Attorney General Rokita, you've joined multiple efforts with other state attorneys general to warn companies with unlawful diversity, equity, and inclusion policies of the plain language of Title VII, prohibiting discrimination in employment settings. Can you speak about the progress of these efforts in Indiana?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. We continue to monitor these companies, and you're right, it was Fortune 100. And so we're basically doing that through their public reporting these days and their filings with the SEC and other places like that.
What obstacles have you encountered throughout this process?
With the companies, it's mostly just the idea that the wokeness of the situation, I would say, the idea that you have to discriminate someone against people in order to please others.
Have you guys had
really the weakness of a C-suite to stand up on principle and morals and do the right thing for everybody.
Have you had obstacles from blue state attorney generals?
They wrote I believe they wrote a competing letter that was wrong on the points. And in order to do what those attorneys general wanted to have done in the letter, you have to gut the Civil Rights Act. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
Which is pretty plain on its face that you're not supposed to discriminate on sex, religion, color, at all.
Right.
And so the only way to do what those attorneys generals want to have done is to gut Title VII.
So what could the EEOC be doing for states who are seeking to end unlawful employment practices?
Well, I associate with the fellow next to me in his testimony when he said that you got to rein the EEOC back in. Okay. They have taken liberties, and that's to put it charitably, regarding the interpretation on Bostock and other similar cases.
Right. Okay.
And so until you get the reforms that the gentleman was talking about done, it's going to be hard, or get people who respect the rule of law in there.
Right. Mr. Berry, in your testimony, you discussed how the EEOC recently filed a lawsuit against Sheets Incorporated alleging racially discriminatory hiring practices. It's my understanding the EEOC has declined to enforce Title VII against other companies with actual and literally explicit restrictions in their employment practices that are based on race. So is the EEOC suing companies over seemingly neutral policies like requiring criminal background checks and appropriate use of enforcement resources in light of more explicit policies based on race at U.S. companies that you have observed in your work?
That's 100% correct, Mr. Chairman. The EEOC is going out of its way to develop these disparate impact lawsuits that are really rather intricate, like the Sheets lawsuit, and ignoring, as best we can tell, charges against companies that just right there in big print on their websites say we're discriminating on the basis of race.
So what should the EEOC be doing about unlawful company DEI practices based exclusively on race?
The EEOC should be taking very serious investigatory and litigation action against those companies that are transgressing the core text of Title VII.
Ms. Stedman, we've recently seen the EEOC issue new guidance on sexual harassment in the workplace. It's the first time since 1999. In your work with the Independent Women's Forum, can you describe how your organization is committed to protecting men and women in the workplace and how EEOC's new guidance might jeopardize safety and freedom of employees? Yeah, absolutely. In the microphone.
Absolutely. So there are instances where we have an over and under enforcement problem, right? As my fellow witnesses have said, we see facial violations of companies that announce programs that are clearly contrary to the plain text of Title VII and the interpretation of Title VII, and yet we see no enforcement in those. And then we see sort of these witch hunts on other topics. And in this case, we see the EEOC interpreting the word sex way beyond not just what the text says, but way beyond what Bostock says, and putting women in the situation in work where in any other context, the behavior of their colleagues would be considered harassment.
Absolutely.
It would be what the EEOC is actually supposed to be protecting women against, and yet they're doing nothing. They're actually, or worse than nothing, they're encouraging it.
Well, so in my last question, can you explain what actions the EEOC can take to appropriately interpret Supreme Court precedent and make clear that it's protecting supports men and women in their workplace?
Yeah, it would start with rescinding the most recent guidance where they explicitly go beyond Bostock. Bostock is very clear. It says it does not apply to single-sex spaces, to locker rooms, to showers, to bathrooms, but this guidance explicitly does apply in those places. So it goes well beyond Bostock. And again, these are exactly the places where female employees are likely to encounter males, identifying as females in a way that is very invasive to women's privacy, to their safety even, and makes them very, very, very uncomfortable at work.
I think that all government is a waste of taxpayer money.